Welcome to the Caffeine Chronicles. I'll be here with a cup of coffee while talking to some very interesting people about how their lives have been enriched by the magical and the mystical. In this episode, I chatted with Daniel Updike of the TDP videocasts. In our conversation, Dan talks to me about his occult background, his near-death experience, and how it changed his whole outlook on life and death. We also discuss the happenings of the last 3 years, especially in Canada, where Dan hails from, and how his occult background helped him through that. He also shares some of his wonderful occult philosophy. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my absolute delight to welcome a wonderful guest today, Mr. Dan Updike of the TDP videocast and the author of Transcendent Keys to Power. And I've been an avid follower of Dan's journey on YouTube, and I was drawn in by the powerful intros on his YouTube videos and his wealth of knowledge and the dedication he puts into sharing his wisdom with the world through his channel and through those strong, dulcet broadcasting tones of his. And now I finally have the honour of sitting down to talk with him about his extraordinary near-death experience and his life as an occult practitioner. He's made a lasting impact on me, and I couldn't be more thrilled to have him here with us. So welcome, Dan, and thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me on.
And could you just start by sharing some of your background information about your interest in the occult and what sparked your interest and started you off on that path?
Sure, I actually was raised in a kind of environment where you'd think I'd be totally against anything occult. I was raised in the home of a Pentecostal preacher. My older brother for many years was also a preacher. And of course, I followed a bit in my father's footsteps and my brother's and went through theological training, and I was credentialed as a minister as well. But through my life, I had very strange occurrences that took place that challenged what I was being taught and really indoctrinated into believing. One thing that comes to mind is when I was very young, before I actually learned how to write, I used to doodle things and write things down and make little symbols. I didn't know they were symbols. And then I got my arse tanned for some of the things I drew. Of course, they did that back then in discipline, not so much today, but they used to call it the Board of Education applied to the seat of knowledge. And I found out later, many years later, when I was a young man, walking through an occult bookstore. I didn't realize, because I had a passion for reading, I didn't realize it was an occult bookstore when I walked through the doors of it. And I looked and I saw my symbols on the cover of a book. And it turned out, because I acquired that book, that I wrote out 19 of the Anglo-Saxon Futhorc runes perfectly. And the one that I always had decorated my notebook had two meanings, basically. If you looked at it from the Anglo-Saxon Futhorc, it was, I believe, Ash, which is the word tree. But if you look at that in the Elder Futhorc, it's Ansus, Odin's favorite rune. And that used to decorate my books all the time. And so, I began to really study things and begin to look into all things occult. And I became very disappointed when I was looking into the runes, because at that time, nowadays, you go around and you can see all kinds of things written about the runes. Then you did not. We're talking about 1979 and 1980. They didn't have too many books written on runes then that weren't like from some academic perspective. And I read some of those too, but they were, page turners, they were not. So I ended up starting to look at something called Hermeticism, because there was all kinds of stuff written about that. And through what many people will call chance, I ended up getting initiated into some orders, and I learned some things. Through that, I learned through my own study as a result of the information that became available to me through that, and some other things too that happened that this is in the beginning of the internet, where things were just starting to get moved from the microfiche film. I don't know if you remember those. I'm dating myself here now, but they didn't go to a computer screen, but you had this little film, like a little film strip that you put through this big magnifier, and you looked at material. They were just starting to put this sort of stuff onto computer digital format. And I didn't realize that you had to have an account to log into the British Museum. I somehow accessed their inner pages. And I read the same stuff on Enochian magic that people like MacGregor Mathers and Wynne Westcott had read and used as source material for their own books. So I got to take a look at the actual digitized versions of the original diagrams that were made. And I just was fascinated by it, fascinated. And, my practice was very, very intense, but I always had the purpose of eventually using some of these techniques to work with the runes in order to contact the northern gods of my own ancestors. Because I wanted to have an idea about where I came from, why I'm here, the questions that most people have about their life. And so after, getting to this stage in the Golden Dawn and some of the other orders that are out there, I'm not going to name them all, but I started to become quite proficient at evocation. And so I used these techniques to call forth some of the northern gods. And what I discovered, to my amazement, because, in those days, everybody said, well, you shouldn't mix systems and you shouldn't do things from one system to another, because if you do that, you may offend the spirits and do this. Well, I found out that they were happy that I had called them. Not how I called them, they didn't care. And then they began to share things with me about how they preferred to interact. And then I found, as books started to come out, other people had been getting the same information. And so I'm sitting there, okay, I must be doing something right here. And so I began to expand my study then to the history that involved both Hermeticism, what is called modern witchcraft, and rune magic. There is a difference in traditional rune magic to that which is practiced in, let's say, Wicca, because they come from different historical contexts. Okay, there were so many tribes that lived in Northern Europe, and each one of them had their own angle. Okay, just like we have all these countries in the world, and each one of them may have a different way of speaking about something that's familiar to everybody, if that makes sense. And
Yes.
so I followed the history back into ancient Egypt and found, Hermeticism was called Hermetism back then. And I got a hold of a translation of the Greek magical papyrus, which is one of the oldest books of magic, somewhere around 2,000 years old. Of course, the one I have is not that. It is a translation of that, just not to be mistaken here. And into Sumeria and into some of the myths that were there, the Gilgamesh, looking through how that affected Egypt, how that affected Mesopotamia, how that affected places like India. And I began to see commonalities in the symbolism And found that in history, like what we know of history, I'm not saying we know it all, we don't, but Shiva is one of the first names ever given to deity in that sense of word. And the symbolism carries through to beings like Savar, which was a demon in the what's now Iran, but in Persia, because of course the violent tribes in northern India used to ruthlessly torment Persia. And so, of course, their gods must be evil. Perspective, right? Moving through to Wotan and Woden and Othin and finding the symbolism is the same. To give an example, Savar has two wolves that run before him as he waves his spear. Well, that sounds familiar. That sounds very much like Yeki and Freki running in front of Othin while Hugin and Munin are going off to get the information of thought and memory from the world and his spear that never misses its mark. And Shiva, who wielded a spear that never missed its mark. And people would say, well, then that just proves that Othin was an evil god. No, Shiva is the destroyer in the Hindu Trinity, but he was the destroyer of illusion, the destroyer of that which is not real. Which means nothing changed, really. If it wasn't real, it never was real. Okay, we just experienced the illusion, and that takes me into the death experience that I had. Talk about a little later, but all of these things rolled together, informed my passion. I did many different jobs and rose to good levels in different careers and so forth, but those were always a means to an end for me. They were a means to an end because my real passion was finding out more about these things, finding out more about the human soul, not just me, but the human soul itself. What is it about us that causes us to be, pardon my shirt here is all wrinkled. Pardon me, I'm just a regular guy. The stuff that goes on in our world, and we can look at the chaos that's happening right now around the world and equate it to the growing pains that are taking place in a major change. I don't know how many of you growing up experienced physical growing pains. I know I did, because I shot up. I was a shrimpy little guy when I was a tiny lad. But then all of a sudden I grew to 6 feet tall by the time I was in grade 7. And oh, my legs hurt. Well, not all my bones and joints had kept up with everything else. And they just called it growing pains. Well, it's the same when it comes to spiritual things too. We're in a phase right now where there's a great deal of competition for our attention to try and keep us away from the real focus we should be having, I believe, which is allowing the transformations to take place that are going on. Because after this phase is done, we're all going to be different. And that's exciting, But if we focus just on the chaos, well, then we miss out on the joy that could be. I hope that helps give a little bit of a context to why I'm doing the things I do and so forth, and who I am.
It sounds like you had a personal calling card from Odin himself, really, drawing the runes on your books before you realized what they were. and then going into the occult bookshop and finding those books and discovering what you'd drawn that you didn't know what they were, and being able to get into the British Museum digital books as well. I mean, I don't believe that was by chance. I think that was meant to be.
It must have been, because I actually tried it since then and got booted out and got emailed, please cease and desist. Because I'm not a member.
And how did all that go down with your family? Because you said your father did you say he was a preacher?
For many, many years, I was basically not communicated with very much by my family. There was interference from certain people to try and make it difficult for me to have a relationship with my kids, which ultimately failed on their part, which I'm thankful for. I have 4 kids, actually, 3 that are biologically mine and 1 that I help raise. And my relationship with them all is there and is growing constantly. And I appreciate that. However, with my other relatives, including my brother and sister, who don't really understand what I do, that's fine. My parents that think I'm the pastor for Satan, totally, they don't understand anything about what I'm doing. I don't even attempt to explain it. My father's going to be 92 on his birthday, and my mother is 86. I'm not going to mess with what they believe. That's not my job to try to convert anybody, whether they're my relative or not, to my point of view. I just speak what I believe from my own experience, and you make up your own mind, because your challenges are not the same as mine. And consciousness is so vast that there is no one person, one group, one belief that is quote unquote right or wrong. It is about what is truly resonating within your deeper self. And when you find that, you go with it. And you find out in the end, you ended up in the same place. And all this business of righteousness and judgment against other people because they are different than you. Well, who are we to say that about somebody? They are just as much an expression of the source as you or I. So that's where compassion comes in. And that doesn't mean we become doormats for anybody. Don't get me wrong. But it does mean that we can have a different level of understanding about why conflicts happen. And then we can figure out what aspect of our egos is in the way causing it to happen. Because really that's what it comes down to, and it really doesn't end up in the grand scheme of the universe being so important.
Yeah. So you would follow your truth, and if people don't accept that, you just have some compassion for them and continue to follow your truth. And
hope that they follow theirs.
Yeah. Yes,
Yeah.
because what is
Sorry,
true
I didn't mean
for
to interrupt there.
No, it's fine. What is true for one person isn't necessarily true for somebody else, but we don't know who's right and who's wrong, do we, really?
No, and I think asking the question of who's right and who's wrong is really not the right one to ask either. It's how does this help or how does this hinder?
Yeah.
One of the things I learned from studying tribal societies, and I have been blessed with the good fortune of knowing people in actual societies today.
Thank you. Yes. And you had quite an intense near-death experience a few years ago, which I think changed your whole outlook on life and death, and has made you kind of fearless of the way the world seems to be going at the moment. And I think from the video that I watched about you talking about your near death experience, you received a lot of information and wisdom about life and death and what we are and where we go when we die. So I've really been looking forward to talking to you about this subject. And I'm just going to start off by asking you that in the days leading up to your near death experience, were there any auguries or indications that something like that was imminent, or did it just come right out of the blue?
There were signs that were there. One of the big ones was for about 2 weeks prior, I had a very odd and weird pain in my left arm. And it felt like if you've ever had your funny bone whacked, it felt like that. But rather than paying attention to it, I thought, well, maybe I banged up against a pipe or something, and I've got an injury, and it'll go away. But apparently not. Uh, I didn't go into some of the details in the video about how it happened, but it was quite shocking to me because I was in really good shape, climbing up all over these towers and scooching under pipes and everything. You got to get into some good physical shape or you're going to be sore, I'll tell you. We had this equipment that we use, very expensive equipment, to go and test these connections of these things. It would detect in parts per billion, not million, but billion with a B, for any type of thing that was out there. But we had to zero it first with gas in order to make sure we were getting accurate readings, kind of like zeroing a scale. And my morning started out, we drove out to the site, and I was filling in information from the day before in the database, and had my morning coffee, you know, same old, same old. Then I picked up the equipment, put it in its container, and carried it out into the parking lot and put it in the truck. As soon as I closed the door, I felt sick to my stomach, and I collapsed on the ground beside the truck. And I just lay there, and I felt like I'd been hit with a hammer. It was just down I went. And I was breathing shallow, but I kept forcing myself to breathe deeper. And I managed to pull myself up from the ground on the side of the pickup truck. And then my partner came out, and I probably shouldn't have been driving at that point in time, but we got into the truck and we drove from our little office there down into where the cylinder room was, where we did our zeroing of the machines. And so I took the machine in there, and I told the guy, I'm not really feeling that great, but I'll zero these machines. And he went off to get the permits to allow us to go into the plant units to do the testing. So I zeroed the machines, still feeling kind of oddly sick to my stomach. And he got the permits, and as soon as he opened the door, I had finished zeroing the machines. I turned off around to meet him, and down I went again right in front of him, like flat onto the concrete floor. And my good fortune was before Brad was working in the oil sands, he had been an EMT, and he knew what was going on. And he told me I looked gray. He helped me up. He didn't have permission. He had a driver's license, but you had to have a special permit to be able to drive on site. He didn't have that. He didn't care. He got me in the truck and drove me to the emergency medical services building. They had ambulances and everything there. And he went off. I don't even remember hearing what he said. But all of a sudden, there's these other people that hauled me out of the truck. They had scissors and cut my coveralls right off of me, threw me in the back of an ambulance, and off we went. And they strapped me to their machine, and they got a 45-minute heart tracing. And that actually, moving ahead about a year, was the only reason the specialists were able to discover how and why what happened to me happened with my heart, and were able to operate on it and cure it. That 45-minute heart tracing. But that's how long it took, riding in that lumber wagon off to the highway to get into Fort McMurray. And then I was taken to the hospital, and they immediately got me into the surgical suite room. And they began to try everything to get my heart to stop doing what it was doing, because it was going in range from 150 to 350 beats per minute. Basically, what it was doing is my heart was wiggling, but it wasn't pumping any blood. So my blood pressure was like next to nothing. They couldn't understand why I was still awake. They spent a good hour trying every different method to get my heart to convert back to a sinus rhythm, the normal pattern, and nothing worked. And this masked face suddenly appears over mine as I'm laying there, and says, Dan is your name? Okay. Nothing that we tried has worked. We've got to get your heart to stop doing this. It is not pumping the blood through your body. We're concerned about your organs. If we don't do anything, you're going to die. But in order to possibly, and those were their words, fix this. No, not we will fix it. We might fix this. We've got to electrocute you and stop your heart. Do you realize what that means? It means we're going to have to terminate your bodily life functions. And then we're going to have to try to resuscitate you. And hopefully that will convert your heart back to its normal rhythm, kind of like a reset button. Need your permission to do so. Well, 6 of one, half a dozen of the other was my response. Just do what you need to do. And so they put this thing in my mouth to prevent me from biting my tongue off. And then they strapped all these electrodes to me. And then they pumped me full of drugs. And they said, these drugs will make sure you don't remember the pain and suffering you're about to go through. And, I'll give them this. Physically, I do not remember the pain. But apparently there must have been some, because the inside of my mouth was chewed up from that thing that they stuck in there. Because they had to stop my heart, and then afterwards, just kind of like in the movies, or clear, they had to try and get it going again. Well, they hit the button. And when they hit the button, I was looking down on them from the top of the room. And it was very, very interesting, because when I was looking down at them from the top of the room, I wasn't concerned about my body at all. I was just looking at it with fascination, I wonder if that's going to work. So I'm sitting there looking down there, and then that's strange that I'm not even concerned about this. And then everything changed, and I was no longer in that room. Or if I was not on the same frequency. I was in a place where everything seemed visible. You see, we only see such a tiny fragment of the light spectrum. I don't even think it's 1%. But it was like I could see and feel the colors of everything, from ultraviolet to infrared to everything. And hearing is not the right word, because hearing implies sound waves going into your ears. But it's hard to explain it any other way. There was a voice that spoke with me and asked me some pretty pointed questions. Are you happy with your life? Are you happy with what you've done with it? Would you have done anything different? Things like that. And then I began to ask some questions. Well, who the hell are you? Well, the answer shocked me. And years later, I understood why it was this particular voice. The voice that answered said, well, you might know me as Asmodeus. My name earlier than that, however, was Aishma. I was Lord of the Seven Powers. Some called me the demon of the wounding spear. But the seven powers are the seven chakras, the main ones that go up the spine. So, well, why are you here? Well, you'll understand in time. But I have something for you. You can ask me any question you want. Just be careful what question you ask. But you can ask me anything and I'll answer it to the best of your minuscule understanding. Okay, I said, how does the universe work? Ha, 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 ha. You don't like the simple questions, do you? However, it is much simpler than you think. You're not supposed to ask a question like that. But I promised. So you will see. Word of warning. Do not define anything. Not a thing. If you try to box it in and define it, it will rip your mind apart. Just let it pass through you like water through a sieve. Don't try to hang on to it. Just let it pass through you. And the words had hardly finished resonating within my being when I could see every particle around me. Whether it was, and anytime my mind shifted, it would shift the whole perspective, like from stars and galaxies to the smallest particles. And there are particles much smaller than quarks that they haven't discovered yet. There they are. However, I did my best to hold off on trying to define what they were. It was just endless. And even when I think about it right now, my hands shake because I dare not try to define it even now. And then, I don't know how long this was. The voice said, here's a little teaching aid for you. This is not what they actually are, but it's a way that you can, a little sliver, understand what you're seeing. And all of the particles turned into numbers. They were all mathematical equations going endlessly in the positive, endlessly in the negative, but they all balanced out to zero. And this was starting to actually trouble me because, of course, the particles of the multiverse are not numbers. That's a human invention. But the mathematical principle is not. That just is what it is. And in looking at that, you move just a little bit closer to trying to define it when you see numbers. And so I was feeling kind of shot by this. And then, like thunder coming through me, it's like this being spoke through me to put an end to the vision. It was in a language I do not recall. but I knew what it meant, like it was instantly translated in my head. I am not, all, nothing. Everything subsided in terms of the effect. But then there was an explanation. I am everything that is, we are. There is no such thing as I. That's the illusion. We are all actors on the stage. I am not all those things that are not physical, all those things that are ethereal. We're that too. All, everything. We are that. Nothing, not nothing as in nothing's there. No thing that can ever be understood or complained. In Kabbalah, if you look in the three veils of negative existence above the tree of life, you'll find the very first one, Ein, which means nothing. It's forbidden to speak of it in Kabbalistic teaching. And so this was just kind of like an affirmation that brought me out of it. When that happened, the voice continued and said, it's not your time to die yet. So you're going to live. Don't waste this opportunity. Time may be illusory, but it is in your experience. Don't waste it. And then I woke up. But what freaked me out the most when I woke up was that I could still see the numbers twirling around me. And that didn't leave for 3 days. It was just, and in the middle of all this is just an aside, they were having some sort of epidemic of, I don't know what, going on. They had no beds at the hospital. So 3 or 4 hours after I regained consciousness, they put me in a wheelchair and led me to the parking lot. And I had to wait for my partner to come back from the site to take me back to the hotel that I'd been living in while working there, because I worked away from home. And I was given written instructions to give to the maitre d' to check on me every 30 minutes in my room to see if I was still alive. And then my boss put me on a bus to go home 2 days later. So, I had to walk up a hill with all my luggage to the Red Arrow bus station, hoping that I wasn't going to drop halfway there to get on a bus to go home. And there my wife met me and brought me home, and then began a long recovery process. This was in 2009 that this happened. But after that, it's like a combination between what they did to me to get my heart converted and what energetically happened to me when I had this vision of things come through me. It's like it short-circuited things in me. And this was what was expressed. Yeah, the question of how the universe works underneath the hood like that is actually not something that people were supposed to ask. So there are limitations imposed upon you physically in result of that question. But don't worry, you don't get to die from it. And I have had, from tests that were given to me afterwards, up to 1,000 times more GABA antibodies in my blood than a normal person. And as an adult, I didn't get late onset diabetes. I got type 1. Just hit my pancreas and killed it. All different things. Nerve issues with my legs and in pain from what I call nerve fire-offs, going through my entire body. Things that geneticists have been looking at, trying to figure out what it is, but yet no damage. And I always hear that voice. Yeah, you get to suffer this stuff for a reason, and you'll know why, but you don't get the privilege of dying from it. So it's kind of like, oh, just the way it is. But it gave me a totally different perspective on the universe and life. And when you realize consciousness is actually a field that permeates everything, and that we're an expression of that consciousness, insert your name here. How does that die? Doesn't. And so what happens to the body really isn't the big issue. Like, it just depends on how long you want to do things here and experience things here. But when this physical body goes, that's not the end of you. That's just the end of your vehicle. And you make a new one. Maybe even not a human one, somewhere else. Who knows? I'm not going to open that can of worms, but I'm just saying the multiverse is a big place. And the power of that connection as well can, no matter what is going on in our lives, create such an ability to experience life to the fullest, that rather than being afraid, like the ego consciousness is, of somehow being unimportant. You know, I'm not Christian, but there is one thing that was written in the New Testament, supposed that was true. Those that would lose their life will find it, and those that would try to save their life will lose it. After this experience, that made sense. Because if we try to hang on to what we think we are, well, that's going to go. But if we realize we are not our body, we are not our thoughts, we are not our feelings, we're not even part of the elements. We are an expression of that which made everything. And we are not less than that either, because we are that, and it is us, collectively and individually. Otherwise, magic wouldn't work. But yet, even people that have no desire or interest in occult things at all are still doing magic every day, or they wouldn't be taking a breath. And it's a, you know, regardless of where you are, what's going on in the world, how is that not freedom? That nothing and no one can ever take away from
you. Wow. That was it's quite intense. And I think the powers that be know this as well, which is why they've turned the screw and tightened the knot to try and make people think that they've got to try and save themselves. Because a lot of the people who were desperate to save themselves, I won't mention, we know, you know what I'm talking about, the medical interventions and the protocols of the last 3 years. A lot of those people that went down that route to save themselves, it didn't end very well for a lot of them, and a lot of people, more people tended to die from the protocols and the lockdowns and the medical intervention than the actual microbe itself, because they were desperate to save themselves. But if you let go and just live life and be creative and live a magical life, in the sense that you know, you're open to everything and that you're a big part of the no thing, then life just changes for you and you can rise above all the agendas that come into play. And people who think like that tend to flourish in times like this while everybody else is falling apart, and you become a spectator to it and the fear goes away. And I think you kind of live in a parallel universe, if you like, a parallel timeline to those people.
I
So
would
yeah.
agree. I would agree very much with that. And it doesn't mean that you don't end up interacting with people from a totally different mindset either. But what other people think and do, that doesn't have to dictate what you think and do. And vice versa, you know. Uh, there's a problem I have if a person feels they have to get everybody to believe the same thing. What a boring world that would be. Uh, that's a life of indoctrinated subservience. And where's the creativity in that? You know, uh, the creativity that we have the potential to experience, even on the smallest scale, is so profound that it's not wasted time. You know, uh, I remember walking through a grocery store. I wasn't that impressed to be there. Um, this wasn't a particular store I enjoyed being in, but my wife wanted to go there. So I went walking along in here looking at all this stuff that there's no way in the universe I would ever want to buy. I'm looking at this, wondering what a waste of time. And then there was something inside of me that just looked like looking through my eyes. And it's like I had wonder. And I'm sitting there, and this thing spoke inside of me and said, nothing is ever wasted. And I just thought, that's right. I want to abide in that. Nothing is ever truly wasted. It's a joy.
Even the mundane things like going to the supermarket is part of the human experience. So, you know, you go there, and perhaps we should look at it more as, oh well, I'm lucky to be here. I'm lucky that I'm here and I can afford to buy some things, because there's lots of people that can't. It's a mundane chore, but it's part of the human experience and it's part of this world for lots of us. So yeah, we should try to find a bit more joy in the mundane tasks that we have to do, instead of, I think people perhaps maybe need to get more into their bodies a bit more and a bit more grounded with the day-to-day stuff, especially in occult circles and magic circles. A lot of people tend to live in their head or in the air, in the crown chakra quite a lot, and they're not grounded. And you can lose touch with reality, I think, sometimes, if you're not careful, and become a little bit woo. So I think a trip to the supermarket and things like that kind of just remind us that we are, we are spiritual beings, but we're having a human experience. So we shouldn't try and cancel those things out, in my opinion.
Oh, I agree with that too, because, we're here to have this experience. And this experience is not less holy, if you want to use that word, than the highest levels. In fact, if you take a look at Kabbalah, it talks about Malkuth being the kingdom. All right. Why? Because it's the crown of another tree that never stops. Because it's like, and of course, this is just foolish conjecture, but it's like the all asking the unanswerable question: what am I? And that which is undefinable, well, that's a question that can never have an answer. So the question's permutations are endless. And, you know, I like the way, I think it was, I can never pronounce his name right, Eckhart Tolle. I could have got his name wrong. I apologize if I did. But he made a statement similar to this, you know, here I am with a cup of coffee. What's my purpose in life? To taste this coffee. You know, uh, so many people think that their purpose in life is to be prime minister, or be president, or be you know, some great company executive, or to make a difference in the world doing something here and there. Yes, we can do all those things. But where are you right now in this present moment? Because this present moment is all we ever have. Yesterday's gone. Tomorrow never comes. 100 years from now, if we were alive, it would still be now for us. So the question is, what are we doing now? Well, then that's our purpose in the present moment. Whether it's a mundane thing, and there really are no mundane things, or whether it's doing something that we consider really spiritual, it's all connected. It's all part of the same thing. And when we realize that the limitations that we've imposed upon ourselves, well, we can release that. Sometimes it's piece by piece, sometimes it's bigger pieces, but we're able to release the self-imposed limitations. The belief that we are unworthy of happiness. That's one of the biggest ones I've found with all the folks that I've ever talked to. Well, why do they believe that? Because somewhere that's what they saw, either from their parents or their family, was unhappiness and strife. That must be what I have to be. And they accept that into their deep mind. And then, like an old tape recording, the deep mind plays that back over and over again. And one snatches defeat from the jaws of victory with it. But when we release that, and it takes time, but it's like the weight of the world gets lifted off of someone's shoulders, and you see the smile actually happen, not the fake one where, you know, hey, how are you doing today? And everybody says, I'm doing fine. But the real smile that comes from the heart. And they realize their happiness doesn't have to take away from anybody else's happiness. Their joy can add to other people's joy, and vice versa. Even if they're from a completely different point of view. But we have to be open to it. And that, I think, is the big challenge, is allowing ourselves to be open to that type of deep change. Because everybody wants to take a look at occult books that talk about how to raise up Bartzabel, or, you know, this is the ritual structure to project into the 9th realm of the 7th quadrant. All right, that's fine to have those techniques, but what are you going to do when you get there? Well, I'll say that I got there. Okay, that was ego. When you are allowing yourself to flow with the connection of who you really are, these types of workings cease to be dogmatic and become something that just flows naturally out of your knowledge of your own true will. And when you are lined up with that, you can do a ritual that is made up of a grocery list, and the spirits will come. Because they don't come because of your fancy words. They come because of who you know you are in truth. That's why. And that's what causes your ancestors to be proud too. because they're a part of that. Doesn't matter where in the world they're from. Okay. Your friends and your family too. Not only from this current lifetime, but I believe that many times the folks that we have considered to be good friends are people that have been with us in various lifetimes together at various times. Their and our interaction affects this too. Like a pod of souls growing together in a particular evolutionary course. And it's exciting. And you know what? There's so much stuff we don't know. We don't know anything. Isn't that wonderful? We don't know shit. Uh, somebody wrote a book. Oh, good. That may work and it may not, but you know what? It's not the book that displays knowledge. The universe is so vast. Every human being that's ever lived in the history of the human race, all of their knowledge is like a grain of sand. We don't even know what electricity is, but we use it all the time. But isn't it great that we don't have to understand the infinite multiverse to realize that we are an expression of it? And just let it do what it bloody wants.
When
First,
you
you're going
think
to have a happier life.
when you think about it, thinking about what you've just said, we don't know nothing. Yet, so much of people's lives are spent arguing over who's right and who's wrong, and opinions. And opinions aren't really knowledge; they're just opinions. And everybody's got an opinion, and we spend so much time. Would you say that was wasted time arguing over differences of opinions?
I think the arguing is a waste of time.
Yeah.
Um, Exploring opinions, exploring with, when you have people that are talking, sometimes it sounds like an argument, but if they're open to understanding information from other people's point of view, then it's a learning experience. As long as people don't start puffing themselves up afterwards saying, oh, we know so much, just remember what we are. Yes, we are part of the all, but the part of us that lives day to day here, okay, is a house cat. Okay. You know, uh, we, there are beings in the universe, and even they, next to the all, are nothing. But compared to us, are like gods, all right? And, we can't even begin to compare to them in our egoic sense. Okay. So it's just best to let that aspect of things go and just learn and have fun with it and realize that it wasn't meant to be something where people butt heads and fight wars. It was meant to be conversations among friends.
To go
And
with the
that's
flow
all it was. Yes.
and have fun along the way and learn, and not try to learn everything. Just like you said, just let it flow through you like water through a sieve.
Mm-hmm.
Let it come to you. Take what you need.
And
Yeah.
sometimes what you receive isn't for you, it's for somebody else. And you know what? My wife has tremendous ability where that concerns, but she doesn't remember a word she said afterwards if it was for somebody else. And I say, I envy you. I'd be sitting there wondering how could I have said that more clearly? Um, she just opens her mouth and lets it come out, and it usually ends up being right on the nail on the head type of a thing. And you know, and that comes where she's sometimes giving hard advice to me too. And sometimes it just comes forth, and she doesn't remember what she said because one of the spirits that we work with happened to see her available and, put their 2 cents in right there. And I think, oh, okay, well, I guess I better change my mind about that. But you got to have that openness that, you know, if we make ourselves rigid and we got to have things this way or no way, then we start imposing expectations on everything from our own personal evolution to the magic we're doing. And then we rob ourselves because the universe will answer, even in the most complex and potent ritual, the way that it desires to do so, not the way you expect it should. And, when you're open to receive, however it manifests, you usually get far more than you ever bargained for. But when you try to restrict it, the infinite doesn't like restriction. And it's not that it has anything against you, it just can't be restricted and it'll just tear it apart. And then discouragement sets in. Well, I must just be a terrible magician, or I must just not be a good person, and I don't deserve to be happy, and I don't. Balls. It's just about being open to receive it in the way that it comes, because it may come to you. Let's say you did a magical working to get a job. If it has to be this one job, well, you might be disappointed. But if you're open to receive, it may be something else that, oh, maybe you didn't like it very much, but because you took that job, some other company looked at you and hired you for something that paid you twice as much as what you were expecting from the original job you wanted. But you would have never got there if you were holding on to those expectations, because that's like dogma. Take a dog for a walk. Don't let it walk you. You get taken for the walk when you are embracing dogma to the exclusion of anything else. That's like my opinion.
It would be like if you did a magical working for the job, using that example, it would be like this job or something better. It's the or something better or something more suited that leaves it open for all kinds of opportunities to come through then, rather than, yes, it's got to be ABC, it's got to be this way, because then there's lots of other opportunities can pass you by. And the way that you're looking through our minuscule sense of perception, it might be the wrong way. You might end up on the wrong path and be unhappy. So I would like this. I would like to manifest this or something better. I think leaves it open for the universe to say, aha, I've got something better.
Yes, indeed. And a willingness to be a participant in your own manifestations. Because, like, using the job as an example again, you can do a great working for a job, but if you don't pass out any resumes or talk to anybody about it, they're not going to hire you because they don't know you exist. You got to get out there and be a participant in your own magic, because if you don't care, the universe doesn't either.
Yeah, you've got to do it through action.
Mm-hmm.
Totally. I think I said in a episode of Hocus Focus last week, if you've got dreams and goals, that's all very well, and you can be proactive to work towards those. But you don't put the action in, there's no point. There's no point in clicking your heels together and clenching your buttocks. It's just not how you manifest things. You've got to put the work in and be proactive and do the action. Yeah, you can't just wish. That's wishing, and that doesn't work.
So. Yeah, I like the way this one TV program put it. Hope is unrealized disappointment. You got to do more than hope. You got to do something in the middle of it all, and then that also shows the universe and your own deeper self that you're serious about it. And,
Absolutely.
you know,
We have a saying here with hope, you've got two hopes. You know, with hope, you've got Bob Hope and no hope, unless you put the work in.
mhm. That's good.
So, uh, since your experience, has that helped you navigate this last three? Do you think that was training for the last 3 years for you? Has that helped you deal with all the things that have come our way? Because we've had agenda after agenda and current thing after current thing, and there's been no let up and no break in between each one. Do you think that that your experience with the near death experience there has helped you with the knowledge that you've brought back, even if it's
I would,
subconscious knowledge?
yes, I would say so. And I know with some of that, like that never stopped flowing. Thank goodness that it doesn't occupy my attention all the time. But whenever I've been in a situation where I've needed something, that aspect comes back to my awareness
Mhm.
for that specific thing, but not for everything else, just that specific thing. And it's been very helpful, uh, especially in terms of, realizing that our bodies respond to our thoughts too. And deep meditational practice not only enables you to explore the planes, but it enables you to explore your body internally. And it's very interesting when you start to realize that you are a little universe. You have billions of cells that live just on your skin. You have trillions of cells that make up your skin and your blood and your brain and all your organs and everything else that's in there, with DNA and RNA and all of them, and making up the blood itself and so forth. And, they're all like little galaxies roaming around, using the universe illustration. But they're all alive and they're all conscious too. And you can actually communicate with. You can communicate with the cells of your body. And it's not like talking to Joe or anything like that. It's like you would communicate with the universe itself. You know, throughout all of this business with the afflictions upon the land. I won't say the word in case YouTube in its glory decides to start censoring people for saying that word again. I never got sick for a day. And I didn't sit at home like a recluse or anything like that either. Uh, but yeah, I never got sick. My wife never got sick. My kids never got sick with it. I was concerned that possibly my middle son might, because he was going to NATE, which is kind of like a technical institute for tradespeople, before he got to be a journeyman in his trade. And they switched that to be virtual. I don't know how they intended to do the practicum without doing on a computer screen, and he was working with metal, but health was there. My parents, very elderly, very at risk, never got sick. Why? I really believe that one of the reasons why that happened was because of that experience in 2009, and the way that, not being forceful with anybody, but sharing that aura of health, I guess. Yeah, I've got diabetes. Nothing I can do about that yet. Maybe there will come a time. I don't know. But I know that it hasn't restricted me any. It's only made and forced me to live a more healthy lifestyle than what I would have prior. I can guarantee that. And even now, it's not like the picture of, I'm not some health nut or anything, but I trimmed down from a 57-inch waist to a 34. And, physically, I'm not in bad shape. But I don't think I would have had any of that confidence or any of that understanding of the connection without that experience being as harsh as it was. Because I had allowed myself for many years to become distracted with the mundane, working for a living, working away from home, basically spending my time doing harm to the earth, really, when it came down to it. Even on the environmental thing there, yes, indeed. But they never took our reports seriously. Somebody way up on the food chain would get taken out for steak and lobster at some multi-million-dollar place, and all of a sudden the reports would be different. How things work with oil companies, right? I needed something to shake things up in my life. That's what it was, that 2009 experience. And I've never looked back from that. And now I am sort of semi-retired. And I do not have to answer to any employer. I look for the boss and I go to the bathroom and look in the mirror. I have all the time I need to do whatever I'm trying to do to make a living, and all the time I need to do my magical practices, to do the meditations that I do, to be able to help others in the Patreon community that we've got. And I would have had none of it if that experience with my heart had not happened in 2009. So yes, I had some things put on me that limited me, but I was given so much more than that. And a joy that has never really left me in my spirit since then. Because I know there is, and I'll repeat this, there is no such thing as I. There is only the all. And we are expressions of that. So we could sit and worry and wart about our physical death all we want. It's not going to change anything. Or we can focus on the fact that when our physical form goes, that's all that goes, is a physical form. And when the time comes that we want to have a physical form again, we will make a new one. And then we'll start the process again. Or maybe we'll go on to something different. That's going to be up to us.
When you was in the middle of your experience, did you see your physical? Did you see your aura or the shape of your body, or was it just consciousness? Did you have a shape, or were you just there conscious? Was it like just being a consciousness?
It was both, actually. When I was looking down on the top, from the top of the room, and one person had pink polka dots on the back of their scrub cap. And I thought it was cute. I just remembered that. Everybody else had sort of the green and the blue. And this person had pink polka dots. I think she was the head nurse. But in any event, I had my form then, and the form, of course, looked exactly like my physical body. That was what I was familiar with, so that's what it was made. One thing that a person can do when they're in an astral form like that is you can actually cause yourself to look any way you want. But because that was what I was most familiar with, although it was like a translucent white, um, just energetic. Uh, when we moved out of that room and I began having a conversation, there was nothing for me to look at. So I don't know whether I was still in some sort of physical form. I didn't feel myself standing on anything. There was just empty void. Uh, I did have an experience several years later where I fell down, and this is kind of embarrassing. I fell down in the bathroom and whopped my head and knocked myself unconscious. And my wife was trying to open the door, but my body was in the way and she couldn't. I ended up having bruised ribs for quite a while over that, but I didn't feel anything. I was just enjoying the fact, and I felt such joy. There was no pain at all, no nerve pain, no nothing. It was just, I was everywhere. I was all things at the same time. And I was just happy. And then from a far distance away, I could hear a voice calling the name, Dan, Dan. And sort of like in slow motion. I remember that name. Okay, let's hear who this is. Oh, I know who that is. That's my wife calling me. Okay, I better wake up here now. And so with an act of forcible will, I brought myself back down to my conscious body. And then at that moment, I felt the door open again. Oh, stop doing that, woman. As I slowly rolled out of the way and, thank you for the bruised ribs, but I'm alive, and I got washed up. But at that point, I had no sense of any type of physical body. It was just completely, it was like every particle. There was not even anything that you could call sight. It was like I just knew what everything was. And that's similar to when Asmodeus moved me, or I moved with him or it to this void where I was looking at the universe. Uh, or it could have been just that that's so vast and I felt so small that I didn't notice it anymore. But there are various different degrees of uh, expansion when you're moving forward. There is an area in what I call the mental realm, which is not having anything to do with your mind. It has to do with thought only, where there is no physicality. Um, Everything is more vibrational, and the understanding is not inhibited by that. It's actually expanded by that, because it's like you're speaking the core language of the universe. And if you know anything about computers, it's like you drop from a high level language like Python to assembly code. You're almost to the point of ones and zeros, but you understand everything much faster, much quickly, much more and more acutely. Whereas when you are more conscious, at least my experiences of the physicality, there's more of an emotional context that goes in with that too, where you feel everything around you. And others may have different experiences in different ways, but that's just the way I work somehow. And in doing astral projection too, that's what I found to be helpful, is knowing what aspect of sense to look for. And then when you have that, always look at your hand. When you look at your hand, if it looks normal, a good chance is you're in a projection. If it looks weird, you're probably just about ready to lucid dream. Another thing that people can do is you can imagine a mirror appearing in front of you. If you look like yourself or like somebody else, but it looks proportioned properly, you might be projecting. But if you look like an octopus, you're probably dreaming. And you can do other different tests to see too. These are just rudimentary, but and you know, just that little anecdote there, if you're getting into occult practice, realize you can make it fun. You can make the process something that brings a smile to your face rather than something that's a drudgery, you know. But yeah, all these things have helped because with what's been going on in the world up till now and including now, like I said earlier, it's like growing pains, and there's going to be different forces at work that want to maintain the control they've always had, and they're not going to be able to. And so they're going to try their best to wreck the whole sandbox. You know, if we can't have it, nobody can. But they're going to fail at that too. But in order to get through this and not end up allowing, you know, yourself to become bitter and twisted, is you need to just see it for what it is and let it roll off you like water from a duck's back. Because once we pass through a certain phase, the power of these elitists is going to be irrelevant. And they know it. That's why they're fighting so hard. So for those that want to see a better future, don't lose hope. Realize every time in human history where there's been a leap in evolution, there's always been a process of difficulty to pass through to get there. And that's just something that we can look at instead of in a negative way. We can say to ourselves, you know what? If every day was a sunny day, what's the sunny day? When we go through something difficult, it causes us to truly appreciate the times that are good and do our best to make those times last the longest.
And you are in Canada, so you were in a particularly, excuse me, you're in Canada, so you're in a particularly, you were in a particularly difficult country to for freedom to be in, because they just had the noose so tight over there with the truck drivers and the bank accounts and everything that I won't mention his name just in case the algorithms pick that up, but your leader, your country's leader, turned the noose so tightly on his people. It was just, watching that from here in the UK was just unbelievable to see. It was terrible. So for you to say that, and you've lived through those times, that just shows the resilience of having an open mind and living a magical life.
Absolutely. And you know, there's a lot of places that are worse off than we are here. I think the point is to not be discouraged, to not focus and give power to those things which are not helpful. Because if we focus on those things, and that's what we exclusively focus on, not that we put our heads in the sand like turkeys or ostriches or anything like that. You know, we are aware of what goes on. And we are aware sometimes for freedom, you have to fight. But we don't fight just for egoic purposes. When that happens, the freedom you're fighting for is no different than the slavery you're fighting against. But when you're free inside, all that goes on around you that is trying to hamper that ends up looking like an amusing temper tantrum. And you know they're going to be gone. Next election here in our country, that particular individual, yeah, he's not going to be there. And if he was, I can guarantee you that there are provinces in this country that would probably separate from the country. They would not tolerate it. And, I don't know how many ethics violations he was found guilty of, at least 3. Yes, our illustrious leader.
Yeah.
I'm just glad it's not me. I'll tell you that. That would be such a horrible job to have, being the prime minister of a country, I'll tell you. Even if you were trying to do the right thing, you never would be able to, because you have too many lobby groups and too many financial interests and corporations that would be getting in the way. No, no, no.
No,
But if you let yourself get caught up in that to such a degree that you're just not able to see anything else, then you're giving your power to that, even if you don't want it, because what you give your attention to primarily is what you give your power to. If you give your power to that joy that is within, if you give your power to that understanding of who you really are, it transcends all of that other stuff. And eventually it rubs off on other people. Not through proselytization or trying to convince and persuade, but just simply by being who you are. It affects other people. And then they're free. And then their friends are free. And then these leaders, quote unquote, have nowhere to go. They're done. And that's what's got to happen on a global scale. That's how the human race gets free. And I hope those that are watching this realize the truth I'm trying to convey here. Because if you want to be free, it starts in here.
Stick, would you like to tell people about your book and where they can purchase it?
Absolutely, absolutely. I've got 2 books, and they are both actually companions. The first one is called Transcendent Keys to Power. Uh, that one is a little costlier because it has color in it. And you can get that on Amazon. All you need to do is type Transcendent Keys to Power in the search box in Amazon, and it'll come up. And there's an ebook format, and there's also the softcover format. And what that book goes through is detailed practice on how to release yourself from unhelpful thought patterns so that you can access what I call the outer ring. Now, the outer ring is not the outer ring of the multiverse. How can there be an outer ring to that which is infinite? It is the outer ring of your evolution, which always expands. It's like the matrix upon which the universe creates. It's something that I beheld in that death experience, actually, that I was able to put after, it took me about 3 years to even get the first draft of that book ready. Looking at things from a vibrational point of view. And it would make me sick to my stomach every time I did that to try and get the sigils that are in there. There's a couple in there that look very traditional, but even those ones were found in a vibratory context, looking at waveforms in 360 degrees, not sensing up or down or left or right or you or me. And when I came out of it, I was throwing up because the body can't handle that type of stuff. And but I did that in order to get those sigils in my book, and then I transcribed those into Transcendent Keys to Power, some of them. Those ones are actually meant for purposes of creating a floor cloth. If you are going to, some people, they used to mark up the floor of their temple area with a sword or what have you. Well, that can get expensive and that can get you thrown out of your apartment. What you can do is you can paint it or draw it on a big sheet. And then you can fold it up and put it away and use it again another time. And you can put them in a particular order, which is for the purpose of helping you focus so that you can work with the spirits in the second book, which is just called The Spirits of the Outer Ring. And there's, I believe, 25 or 27 sigils in there that I put in there out of 45 that I've got. But those sigils take you to a place not of traditional evocation where you have a triangle and incense burning and you do different things with either a black mirror or an obsidian ball. You can do it that way if you want, but what this does is it brings you and it brings the spirit to a halfway point where you get to experience the spirit and the spirit experiences you, and you communicate with it based upon your level of understanding of who you are, under the guardianship of the spirits shown in the back of Transcendent Keys to Power. Now, when you experience the spirits of the outer ring, and this is a way to tell that you've actually successfully connected with them, you feel like you are on a shaky boat that is moving up and down and from side to side unpredictably, because you are not dealing with egregores that have been created in the mind of collective human consciousness. You are dealing with a form of energy that is responsible for moving particles in a certain way. And of course, it moves your particles in a certain way when you come in contact with it. And so it makes you feel like you're on a spinning ride. At least it did that for me. If you have a different experience, please let me know and tell me how you did it. Because Dan hates throwing up. And I did it enough times when I was working with the spirits of the outer ring. But their effect is very swift and very accurate. And it is based, again, your effectiveness in communicating with them is based on how you grow in your own connection to who you really are. And that happens exponentially as you follow from the first book the different ways of releasing those unhelpful thought patterns that we've all got. I never said, and I never will, that I'm not, I even considered going to a cult deprogrammer once, because the stuff that I was taught and indoctrinated in, it was a very hard thing to get past. We all have those things, but as we try to fight them, we give them more strength. By releasing them and then replacing them with something more helpful, we can get rid of them for good. And it just opens up that ability to receive that I was talking about earlier in our discussion here, all that much more. And it brings that joy, all that much more. But a person has to be willing to do the work. And if a person's not willing to release any of the unhelpful things that are there, they cannot expect to have too much success in any magical power. But you can get either of those books, the Transcendent Keys to Power or the Spirits of the Outer Ring, just on Amazon at any location, whether it's the UK, the United States, Canada, South Africa, even Japan, apparently. You just on the Amazon of your choice, type in the title of the book. It'll take you there, and you can choose either the ebook format or softcover. And that's how you do it.
I will put the links in the description box to the books for you, so people can go straight there and have a look. And
Awesome, thank you.
would you like to tell people about your Patreon and your YouTube channel and where they can find you?
Sure, I can certainly do that. For Patreon, all you need to do is go to patreon.com/TDP videocasts. Okay. TDP originally stood for The Damned Podcast. And that was because people would always say, "What's the name of your damned podcast?" So I said, "Well, if it's The Damned Podcast, well, you remembered it. Type it in." And so that eventually evolved into the TDP. And the way you can find that on YouTube is just type in TDP videocast. It'll come right there. I have one of those personalized links, but it's so long. I'll just pass it along to you there, and you can put it, if you want to, into the description box. But yeah, YouTube is just easy, TDP videocast. And Patreon, it's just www.patreon.com/TDP videocasts. And you'll find it there. And the Patreon community is not someplace where I charge scads of money. I don't make my money off of any of the practices that I do, because I have other things I do for myself for a living. But there is a principle where if somebody gets certain knowledge for free, even if all they're doing is spending between $2 and $10, that small expenditure means they'll at least peruse it. Because a lot of times when it's just free stuff that's out there, and I don't know why this is, because I would, if I knew that people would actually go through it, but they just file it in file 13 somewhere and get to it 25 years later. And some of the stuff that we have, one of the largest archives of occult material on Patreon, from what some folks have told me, and it's gigabytes and gigabytes and gigabytes of video teaching and mythology readings and online rituals. Now, our online rituals are not text format. Okay, we are in our temples and we are on streaming together in video, and we are doing the magic. I don't know how many times I've seen people that are in our group there. Twice, one individual from Brazil having issues with work, all of a sudden got a job paying twice as much as what he'd ever thought he'd get. And he got it within a day. And then when that dried up, he asked for help again, and we did a ritual for him there. The next day, he gets hired by an IT company from France, and he gets to work at home with less hours and more money. And his grandmother being ill, he needed to be around there to help be a caregiver. So this was like perfect for him. Another fella from Alaska, did a ritual with us, and they've been trying to have a child for years and years. And all of a sudden we get the message, "My wife is pregnant." The birth of his child is coming very soon now. Ladies that are down in Arizona, again, wondering about home situations. Where am I going to live? They have their own house. And how did these things happen? Not because of the fact that they had scads of resources, but because they asked for help, and ritually we worked with it. And we did the work actually there, and the results come in. People who have been healed of physical afflictions. Again, if anybody knows how to get rid of diabetes, let me know, because I've been working on that one for a number of years. But everybody else seems to find that it works for them, so that's good. And the stuff that we do, and the teaching that we have that is not put out on the YouTube channel and is put on the Patreon channel. What I tried to do on YouTube is to explain how things work, so that if a person has an interest in something more, whether they come to our Patreon or not, they have the information in hand to be able to know whatever they're looking at, whether it's something legitimate or not, or whether it's something that's not going to help them. And because there's so many confusing and conflicting voices out there, I try to be the calm voice when I'm on there. So yeah, that's basically what I do, and when I'm not doing that, I am busy writing computer programs and doing other things of that nature that are just as much fun to me, because to me that's not mundane. I find actually it teaches me things about the occult too, because when you're working with cybersecurity and programming, you're dealing with languages and machines and so forth. You begin to realize how programmed we are. And then you begin to think of creative ways to release that. Strange thought process to have while trying to get a database to work, but it is,
Well, we started this coffee hour with the intention of having a casual chat, and it's quickly turned into several cups of coffee, I think, and a really great in-depth conversation. And for me, I don't know about you, but the time has simply flown by, and I've really, really enjoyed myself. And I've actually, took quite a lot of what you've said on board and lots to think about. And I can't thank you enough for sharing your experiences and your insights and knowledge with us. It has been an absolute pleasure, and it was well worth the wait. So I would love to have you on the show again in the future, and I really do hope you'll come back. And if you've been blown away as much as I have by Dan's insights, then please show your support by liking and subscribing to his YouTube channel. Go and check out his Patreon, and please go into the description box and pop over to the links to his books on Amazon. And once again, thank you, Dan, for your time and enlightening conversation. It's really refreshing. And thank you to all of you guys for watching, and we'll see you soon.